Hello, FCWC family. It is December 18th, 1 week away from Christmas. And our Advent reading today from David Jeremiah's book, Why the Nativity, it asks the question, why was King Herod so angry? The Judean province where Jesus was born lay beneath a double curse. The primary burden, of course, was its occupation by the Roman Empire. In 63 BC, Pompey, the Roman general, stormed Jerusalem and claimed the entire region for Rome. For years, there had been several factions squabbling over ownership of Jerusalem. Now the Romans were in firm control. The second shadow was cast by Herod, the king of the Jews. His is a familiar name in the Nativity story. Who exactly was Herod? And what part did he play in the coming of Christ? He was the son of Antipater, who had been appointed procurator of Judea when the Romans ascended to power in the territory. But in 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated in Rome. A civil war erupted there, and when the smoke cleared, Mark Antony was one of the winners. He favored Antipater's son Herod, a half-Jew, to keep order in Judea. The Roman Senate even named him King of the Jews in 37 BC, as if that would carry any weight with the common folk. It certainly didn't. Even with Rome's backing, Herod had to fight for 33 years to secure his position. Maintaining a far-flung empire is perilous business. As the Romans struggled to keep order at home and in many other places, Herod had to be on his guard at his own Middle Eastern outpost. Cleopatra of Egypt wanted to steal this real estate for her people. Syrian and Greek factions were active. Then, of course, there were the Jews themselves, who hated Herod. They saw him kill the high priest and many other priests. He routinely assassinated anyone who could possibly be considered disloyal to him. So even when Herod began rebuilding the fallen temple in a calculated move to win the hearts of the Jews, they resented him still. After all, wasn't he also building temples to all sorts of other pagan gods? Wasn't he simply a tool of the Roman outsiders whose soldiers crucified peasants simply for public intimidation? Didn't he enforce their outrageous taxes as well as demanding his own as the Romans allowed him to do? Herod stood no chance of ever being a beloved ruler or of having his own people acknowledge him as King of the Jews. He would never occupy his throne without a furtive glance into the shadows of the room. He knew that with the slightest shift of political winds back in Italy, he would be ousted and probably slain. It would take only one concentrated uprising by the Jewish rebels to overcome all his security precautions. It was not good to be king, but yet Herod the Great fought to keep what he had. It's not surprising that the king suffered from paranoia as well as an incurable physical disease. As the time approached for the birth of Christ, he was in his final days, an old man immersed in pain and bitterness. As an obscure peasant and his pregnant wife approached the town of Bethlehem for a census, King Herod was 6 miles away at Herodium, his proud fortress. It stood high on a hill in sight of the city of David. The miserable king was thinking about death at the very time when someone was coming to conquer it. He was making funeral arrangements, attempting suicide unsuccessfully, and lying awake through the night, wondering who would come in the night to steal his crown. It was during these days of decline that the king's advisors briefed him on an interesting occurrence in the city. Visitors from the east had been asking questions in Jerusalem. They wanted to know where they might find the king of the Jews. The king, they were told, was out of town at present. He was resting at his private retreat and wished not to be disturbed. I beg your pardon? No, the visitors would have said. We seek the new king of the Jews, whose birth was revealed to us by a star. Herod may have heard about the commotion in Bethlehem, some woman giving birth in a cave and shepherds worshiping the child. It could all be dismissed as crazy talk during the commotion of the Roman census. However, we are told that all of Jerusalem was abuzz over the quest of the wise men. Herod took notice. If there remained in his life any purpose by this time, it was not to root out heir appearance. He had been doing so for years, and there was already blood on his hands, the blood of his own wife, his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, 3 of his sons, and 46 priests, along with untold others. In a world of poverty, he lived in the richest palace, yet we can be certain he was miserable. His heart was dark, his soul ruined, his days riddled with self-loathing. By this time, it would have been little more than a reflex action to order one more death, or a few hundred of them. Meanwhile, a short walk away, another king of the Jews occupied the crude throne of an animal trough. His legacy was not death but life, not misery but joy, not clutching what he had put but giving it away. Instead of having the blood of others on his hands, the king's blood would be freely given to buy his people's pardon. And while the throne of Herod would soon be dust, Jesus would rule forever. Herod tried to manipulate the wise men to lead him to the child. When that failed, he decided to simply kill all the infant males 2 years old and under to be sure he wiped the slate clean of any future competition. That plot too was thwarted. Herod didn't reckon upon the possibility that God, who fills thrones and topples them, might even then be working his own purposes. Herod died soon after. You can visit the impressive ruins of Herodium and see the dust of his legacy. As for the wise men, they went home by another way. And the little king in the manger, he rules even today, wise, good, and beloved by billions of subjects. You can visit his palace too. It is alive and growing more beautiful each day as children come by the thousands and the 10,000s to join his eternal kingdom of life and light.